Hi everyone. So hopefully you've finished off writing up your description of the cartoon from the first slide, which would have been our starter activity. So as promised, you can see now that we've got our lesson title for today. Why was poverty such a problem by the 1830s? So our inquiry overall is looking at the success of a range of social reforms across 2 decades really, 30s and 40s, although we do slip into the early 50s with this. And our success criteria, by the end of this lesson, this slideshow, you should be able to identify a range of reasons for poverty. You should be able to explain the concept of laissez faire, and you should have evaluated a range of sources. So we're actually going to look at 4 sources, and you're going to evaluate 3 of those. So that's what we're aiming for. So again, pause here. Get your lesson title written down in nice big letters. Don't forget to underline it with a ruler and put a date on it. This is just like you were in a normal lesson, and of course it can go into your folder just simply as the next piece of work following on from your work on Peel as leader of the Conservative Party. Okay, so now you've got your lesson title written down, your description of the cartoon from the first slide penned. We're now ready to start the main portion of today's lesson. So you're going to need a photocopied chapter, as it says there on the slide. Now don't panic, some of you have got a paper copy of this because you popped in before the school closed completely. If you haven't, not a problem, the chapter is available on Schoology. So if you pause this, flip over to schoology.com and log in the normal way. You should all have the access code for A-level history, and if not, check Go for Schools, it's all on there. So if you log on to there and go into Pitt Peel, and then go into the topic that we're currently on, which is Peel and Social Reform, so you need to check that folder, you'll see there's a PDF in there, and it's actually called Photocopied Chapter, and that will bring you up an electronic version of this. So if you've got a printer, you could print it out, although it's quite long, or alternatively, you could just refer to it electronically. Not a problem at all. So once you've got that sorted, so yeah, pause and go and get that. And we're back in the room. Brilliant. So hopefully you've got your resource in front of you that you need. We are going to look first at the keywords on the right-hand side of this slide. So there are 8 keywords there, which you're going to come across as part of your study of poverty in the early 19th century. I would suggest you set up a glossary now. So write out those 8 keywords, spread them out, because we don't just want the kind of basic dictionary definition of each. We also want to be able to talk about them as historical concepts. So to fill in a bit of contextual knowledge about what they mean in particular in the 1830s and the 1840s. So underneath today's title, just write out those 8 words and leave plenty of space, maybe even 4 lines between each one. And once you've done that, I'm going to talk briefly about each keyword and what it means, and then you can add to that as you do your reading around this topic. Fabulous. So hopefully you have paused and written out the keywords, and now we're ready to kind of talk through each one. So enclosure, first of all, I'm sure you've heard of this before. It's part of the agricultural revolution in this country, but in actual fact enclosure had been going on in some form since Elizabethan times, and very simply it means villagers could vote to enclose, and many more of them started to do this. So they got rid of the open field system, the strip farming that was prevalent in the medieval world, and instead they took their strips and formed them into square fields surrounded by hedges and fences, as you would see in a modern farming landscape. It was great if you had some land, you could experiment with new techniques, you could keep animals in your new fields, but it wasn't great for the very, very poorest, and that's why it contributed to poverty. If you were a poor farm labourer, in other words, you relied on working for other people in the rural area, you would lose access to something called the common land. So the common land would have been an area in all villages, where you could allow perhaps a chicken or two to roam freely, you could forage for wild foods such as berries, you could hunt for fuel, for firewood or for building materials. And as a result of enclosure, the common land was abolished. It was gone. It was divided up amongst the richer villages. So for the very, very poorest in society at this time, enclosure was not a positive change. Second word, supplementary income. And remember to just pause this as you need to get this written down. Supplementary income was income that was secondary to your main occupation. So in the 1800s, a common form of supplementary income was that farmers would often make woolen cloth to supplement the money they made from farming. So in the farmer's cottage would be a spinning wheel, and that would be used to turn the raw sheep's fleece into yarn or wool. That would be the job of the females within the cottage. And then often within the cottage there'd also be a loom next to a large window, and it was the male's job to weave the yarn or wool into cloth. And then a merchant would come by, perhaps on a monthly basis, and would purchase by weight the cloth that had been made, and that would give you a supplementary income, a bit of extra money. Now, unfortunately, as you know, by the 1830s, 1840s, textile mills and factories were springing up all over the country. So the demand for home-produced woolen cloth just fell, that nobody wanted that. They wanted cotton, and of course the factories could make cloth much more cheaply. So that again, another cause of poverty. Supplementary income disappeared in rural areas. Third word, Speen-Hamland system. Speen-Hamland is a place. It's the name of a place in Berkshire. And the system that they came up with there was to help the very, very poorest agricultural labourers. Their wages were so low, so these are people working on farms for other people in agricultural areas. Their wages were so low that they just simply could not afford to feed their family on what they earned. And so the local council decided to set up a system where they would top up those wages to a level where they could afford the basic necessities. It sounds good. It wasn't great because it got rolled out to other areas of the country, and it gave the farmers an excuse to continue paying wages that were below the level necessary for an ordinary family to just keep themselves. So it wasn't a great system long term for the country as a whole. Fourth term, population growth. I'm sure I don't need to explain that. The reason why it's becoming an issue during our era, the era of the Industrial Revolution, is that as families or people move away from rural areas and into cities for work in the textile mills, they get married sooner. So it was common in rural areas for couples to wait until they inherited their land and then get married. And that meant they had less childbearing years ahead of them. In the cities, there was no need to wait. So couples got married earlier and earlier, and that meant they had more reproductive years and families tended to be larger. And of course, that contributes to the issue of poverty. More mouths to feed, more people needing jobs, etc., etc. Next word, social mobility. This is the word to describe movement up or down the social structure. It does become more possible to move between classes in our era, and it also has an impact on poverty. More of that in a future lesson. Next one, poor rate. Now, a rate, any of you who have parents who are business owners will know that rates are paid for local services. So a poor rate was paid in the local area by the more well-off to pay for poverty relief, to pay to provide necessities for people too poor to provide for themselves. It was done on a local level. So there was help for poor people at this time, but it was very much organised in the local area by the payment of poor rates. Parishes. Parishes is the name given to a local area. You perhaps heard the term, we still use it in the modern day. For example, we have All Saints Church in St Ives, which is our parish church. So the parish is a small area of land, usually has a church on it as well. And parishes were how poor relief was organised in the 1830s and 1840s. So you would have to apply to your own local parish. You couldn't get poor relief, if you'd moved away to go to a city for work, they would not pay you. You'd have to go back to your original parish to apply for help. So, and parishes, there were approximately 15,000 of them at this time. So lots and lots of them, very, very difficult to coordinate any kind of national, that means countrywide, poor relief. And finally, laissez faire, which was kind of on our success criteria earlier. You'll have come across this before because, of course, it was a method of running the economy that was beloved of William Pitt as well as his protege, Robert Peel. It means leave alone. So the idea is, in order to maximise wealth creation, as a government, you shouldn't interfere. Don't interfere in people's lives. Now, that's great if you're a successful business. It's not so great if you're a poor person, because it means there's not going to be an awful lot of help for you. So, and there's a couple of stretch and challenge questions there. And I've mentioned Pitt is a proponent of laissez faire, so I think you can probably guess how he might have responded to poverty. Okay, so do pause it if you need to and just finish off your glossary. Fabulous. I'm assuming now that you've got your glossary done, and so as it says on the left hand side, you need to reach page 138 of your photocopied chapter, which you should have retrieved from Schoology if you didn't have a copy at home with you. So the title at the top of page 138 is What Was Poverty in the 1830s and Who Were the Poor? So I'm not going to read it out for you, you'll be relieved to know. I'm going to assume that as good A-level students you lot can read. So have a close look at page 138, and there are two tasks that we'd like you to do. The first task is to do a simple diagram of the reasons for poverty. So a spider diagram will do, or a list, whatever suits you best. And what are the factors that are causing poverty in the 1830s? And secondly, which is on the slide, why was there no national system? In other words, why didn't the whole country have one simple system of helping the poor? And there's a variety of reasons for that, so I'd like you to write up an answer as best you can. It's to do with the difficulty of organisation. It's to do with the wide range of factors that cause poverty. There's perhaps no one size fits all. It's to do with the prevailing government attitude of laissez faire. So there's lots and lots of different reasons why there was never any push from Peel as Prime Minister or central government at all to tackle poverty on a national level. So see if you can explain that in your own words, please. Okay, so you need to pause the slideshow here and complete those tasks before you move on. Right, hi everyone. So I'm assuming that we have got the title. We've done a summary of that first cartoon that we discussed. It seems like a long time ago now. You've got your glossary of keywords about poverty. You have read page 138 and you have answered the two questions that I asked you to, which was to create a summary of the reasons for poverty. And the eagle-eyed amongst you might have spotted that there's some really good diagrams, dead simple, on page 139, which help you with that. And secondly, to explain why there was no national system for dealing with poverty by the 1830s. So if you've done all that, you're doing absolutely brilliantly. The next thing I want to just pay attention to, or turn your attention to even, was on page 141, there is a box which says Learning Trouble Spot, and it has laissez faire at the top of it. So I said you'd be finding out more about each of those keywords and you'd possibly need to add to your glossary. So I hope you did leave lots of lines. So I'd like you to have a look at that box on laissez faire and just add any extra information that you didn't already know to your glossary to help with your understanding of that key economic term. So just pause, page 141, laissez faire box, off you go. Marvellous. So now you're all experts on laissez faire and the causes of poverty. Final thing we've got to do for our success criteria today is evaluate some sources for utility. So we're working now from page 140 and page 141 of that same photocopied chapter. First thing we're going to look at, as it says at the top there, is source 9.2. I really like this one because I'm very nosy. So I love poking into other people's affairs. So you'll see page 140, source 9.2 is a budget of a labourer's family from 1795. So at the top there, you've got the 4 members of the household. So the man is a carter, which means that he would have had his own cart and probably a horse, and would have carried goods around in a cart, and people would have paid him. So like an early version of a man plus van. And his earnings were 12 shillings a week, so 12s shillings. A shilling is 5 pence, by the way. I'll leave you to do the maths. 60p a week. Then his wife is a cotton rover. So she worked in a textile factory, and her job would be to load up the yarn, the cotton thread, onto the bobbins on the machinery. And her wage per week was 6 pence. 60 is 6 pence. And then he's got 2 daughters who, interestingly enough, are better paid than his wife. And they earn 2 shillings or thereabouts. The older one earns a bit more, doesn't she? A couple of shillings a week as well. So that gives you their total income. And then you can have a look at their expenditure. What do they need to spend their money on, and how much does it cost? So the question we have for you is, what were the main items of income and expenditure? So have a look at the expenditure chart more closely. What are they spending the most money on? And then secondly, could they have saved any money? Is there anything they're spending here which is surplus to requirements? Have they got any luxuries in their life at all? Because you'll see that they are spending more than they are earning. So they definitely need to cut it down. So have a little think about that and see whether there is any way that this family could save themselves a shilling and 6 pence a week. Or indeed, could they earn more in a week? Okay, and just you can pause it while you just perhaps write up a few thoughts on that source and what it tells you about the life of the poor. Fabulous. So we've looked at that. So now, final activity is to look at the 3 sources that are underlined there on the slideshow: 9.3, 9.5, 9.6. So source 9.3 is a picture from the front page of a magazine. Source 9.5 is from a report by a medical officer employed by a poor law union, which is a kind of local area that we're trying to help the poor. And 9.6 is written by Mrs. Gaskell, E. Gaskell, and she's a novelist, and she again describes the life of the urban poor. So what we'd like you to do is, for each source, consider how useful, how valuable it is as a piece of evidence for finding out about the poor. So you want to look at Canop. Okay. So the C is for the source content. What does it tell you? Or for source 9.3, what does it show you? How are people living at this time? NOP, the nature, the origin, the purpose, or as we've been talking about in my class, just the provenance. What's the date? Who's the author? Is this believable? Is it truthful? Would they really know about poverty? Have they got first-hand experience? What can you say about the strength of the evidence? And then, okay, your own knowledge. What do you now know about poverty from reading page 138 that would help you to interpret what the sources are saying? So again, if you could just pause this and have a look at those 3 sources, and we've put on the slide there sentence starters for you to use to write your work up. So if you kind of copy and complete for each of those 3 sources, that'll give you some really valuable practice on looking at sources. Right, hi everybody. So hopefully you've done your source analysis there of those 3 sources. I'm really enjoying this remote teaching. I've even just gone off and made myself a cup of tea there. It's great. I've also had to kill my children because they were shouting some kind of sailor's shanty from the next room, so apologies about the background noise. Okay, so just self-checking the work that you've done on those 3 sources. We'll talk briefly about each one, as we would have if we were in a lesson together. So source 9.3, hopefully you noticed some of the kind of points in the picture there. It's not a kind of satirical cartoon, this one. It's just the front page of a kind of magazine, the Illustrated London News. So this is presumably trying to show people in London, readers in London, what it was like to be poor in Birmingham. And we can assume that the Illustrated London News would have perhaps been more popular with the richer members of society. Source 9.2 tells us that the poor didn't have a lot of spare cash to go out and buy magazines, for example, did they? And content we've got there, we've got a couple of doors, which we assume are the outdoor privies. Perhaps we've got the children in the yard, the washing strung across the yard, the closeness of the houses, showing that it's very densely populated, so on and so forth. It doesn't seem to have a particular bias. It seems to me to be a fairly accurate representation of life in poverty at that time. Source 9.5 is this report from the medical officer in Dorset. So this is a description of poverty in a rural area, isn't it? Because Dorset, even I know, southern England is not a county that has lots of kind of large cities and densely populated areas. So this is, I would imagine, a truthful and reliable source. The medical officer would have been an educated person, and the fact that it was a report suggests that it would be factual, and he is working for a poor law union, so he comes into contact with poverty all the time. And he describes, doesn't he, his pretty horrible cottages that the labourers are living in. And finally, source 9.6 by Mrs. Gaskell. A Unitarian minister she was married to. That just means a vicar. So a Unitarian is a form of the Protestant religion. So she's married to a religious man. They live in Manchester, and it tells you that she writes novels, basically. So in this particular novel, which is called Mary Barton, she describes a cellar that a poor family are living in. So she's describing kind of urban poverty in a kind of city area. It's a novel. Could it be a little bit exaggerated, maybe? However, cross-referencing it back with 9.2, we know that wages were low. Women, although employed, didn't earn very much. Fuel probably would have been expensive, so it's true to say there perhaps would have been an empty fireplace, etc. So it's a novel, it's possibly exaggerated. However, it does cross-reference with the family budget that we looked at in source 9.2, which, suggests there are elements of truth in what she's saying. Okay, haven't we worked hard today? So, just returning back to what we started with and checking that you guys are confident you've done a good job with today's lesson. The title was Why Was Poverty Such a Problem? Should feel confident that you've got an answer to that in your head now. You should have a diagram or a list of the reasons for poverty in the 1830s, 1840s. And just a reminder that there was a good summary diagram on page 139 of the photocopied chapter that you've been working on, and it gives you causes of poverty in rural and urban areas on the two left-hand pictures, so that you can easily kind of just do a quick self-check on that. Laissez, faire, you should be good on that now. That's in your glossary, and I also asked you to look at the box on page 141 on laissez, faire, so you should have added a bit of understanding on that. And finally, evaluate a range of sources for utility, in other words, usefulness. Well, that's what we've just done. So we've had a look at 4 sources, and we've analysed the final 3 in particular based on their strength as pieces of historical evidence. So I hope you've enjoyed this lesson as much as I inevitably have, and we will look forward to some feedback. Do feel free to email me if you've got any kind of tips or things that might work better. It's new waters, so we're trying to come up with ideas that keeps you guys working during this unusual period of the school being closed. So yeah, thanks for listening. Good luck everybody, and speak to you again soon.